under a sky the color of old ash. The wind swept low across the prairie with a hush so complete it felt like the land itself had paused, holding its breath in anticipation or mourning. A rusted horseshoe, dangling from a weathered nail on a post, clanged faintly, an orphan sound in the stillness. Snow hadn't yet come, but the air bore its weight, sharp and brimming with a chill that felt like grief made visible. Rhett McKay stood barefoot on the porch, his shirt damp with sweat and spilled milk, the edges of his cuffs crusted with dried blood. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of hard labor mending fences, splitting wood. Bearing loss hung limply by his sides. Behind him, the cabin door stood ajar, open just wide enough to let out the mingled scent of pine oil and boiled linens. Inside, the cradle lay empty, the bed did not. His wife had died without a sound, just a breath, faint as the snapping of a thread, vanishing into the wind. He had called her name 3 times, once when the bleeding began, once when her eyes stilled, and once more when their newborn daughter began to scream with the feral cry of a creature caught between arrival and abandonment. Now she wouldn't stop crying. Rhett turned and stepped back into the single-room cabin. The hearth's flame had died to a soft pulse. The kettle hissed faintly on the coals. The baby lay on the floor by the fire, swaddled in a patchwork quilt. Her face was raw from crying, her mouth wide open in a scream that sounded less like need and more like protest. She cried like someone who didn't know if she'd been born or buried. Rhett knelt beside her, rough fingers trembling just above her cheek. He didn't touch her, not yet. Her mother's lips had still been warm when he kissed them. It hadn't felt like a goodbye. It had felt like the wrong soul had been taken, like the universe had misplaced something it couldn't retrieve. "I don't know how to feed you," he whispered, broken and low. "I don't know how to do any of it." The baby answered with another shriek that made the tin cups rattle on the shelf outside. The wind gathered itself again. He bundled her tighter, tucking her beneath his coat, holding her to his chest where her weight barely registered a heartbeat with bones, a cry with no one to hush it. Then, without saddling the wagon or leaving a note, he mounted his horse and rode toward town, leaving behind the still warm body of his wife under a hand-stitched quilt, and carrying the living breath of her legacy against his ribs. Town was 10 miles of dust and the memory of better days. By the time he reached Main Street, most storefronts had gone dark, lanterns flickering behind shutters, warm yellow light barely pushing back the night. The general store was locked. The church stood open, its door ajar, light spilling out onto the dirt like spilled whiskey. Inside, voices lifted in hymn, well-fed, well-dressed people singing of mercy and grace, while rarely stepping outside to offer either. Rhett dismounted and stepped inside. The music halted. He stood in the doorway like a man carved from grief. His boots were caked in mud. His coat sagged with the weight of the child. His eyes were empty, carved out by something rest could not repair. Preacher Cowro cleared his throat. "Evenin', Rhett. You need something?" The baby let out a weak, scratchy cry, tired now, but not done. Rhett opened his coat, just enough for the gathered to see the tiny bundle stirring against his chest. "Annabeth's gone," he said flatly. "I need someone who can feed her." Whispers ignited like dry pine catching flame. One woman gasped. Another crossed herself. "Willa." Someone murmured. "She ain't got no children, ain't got a husband either. She's cursed." Another hissed. "You give that child to her, she won't last a week." Rhett turned to the preacher. "You gotta help me or not?" Cal hesitated, glancing toward the pews. "There's only one woman in town, got a nanny goat and hands clean enough for a newborn. But she won't do it for you. I don't care what she does it for." So Cal gave him the directions, not like they were offering help, but like they were delivering a sentence. Rhett said nothing more. He turned and walked out, the silent judgment of the congregation clinging to him like a second skin. Willa Thompson lived at the edge of town, near the bramble fields where thornbrush tangled wild and stubborn. Her house was a crooked-roofed thing, barely more than a cottage. The fence leaned. The windows were dark, but there was a sense of order to the place, a kind of quiet vigilance born not from pride, but from the necessity of survival. He knocked once. The door opened a sliver. Willa stood behind it, wrapped in a gray shawl, her dress plain. Her dark hair braided back into a thick rope down her back. Her face was lean, not hard, but unreadable, like a book kept high on a shelf. Her eyes dropped to the baby, then back to Rhett's. "What do you want, Rhett McKay?" He had no poetry left in him, no speeches, only the plain weight of truth. "My wife's dead. Baby needs milk. You got any?" She didn't move. Her hand stayed on the doorframe. She didn't ask the child's name, didn't ask how long Annabeth had been gone. She just opened the door a little wider. "I'll feed her." The interior was warm and spare. No ruffles, no decorations. Everything had a use. The hearth flickered steady, throwing long shadows across the wooden floor. A pot of stew steamed quietly on the table, either forgotten or left to wait. Willa took the baby without a word. She held her close, shifting the bundle to her shoulder with ease, the kind of care that had been practiced in silence. The girl whimpered faintly. Willa hushed her with soft, patient murmurs. She poured milk into a cloth, twisted it into a practiced shape, and offered it to the baby's lips. The child latched awkwardly, then hungrily. "She's starving," Willa murmured. "She's 2 hours old." A silence settled between them, waited, but not cruel. "She got a name?" Willa asked. "Not yet." Willa glanced at him then, down at the baby. "That's fine. Name should be earned." Rhett lingered longer than he meant to. He watched the baby doze against Willa's chest, watched her fold the quilt with careful hands that gave more tenderness than her voice allowed. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said finally. "Bring firewood, maybe oats." She nodded, eyes on the child. "Bring clean rags and a comb." He left without saying thank you. It didn't feel necessary. By the time he reached the cabin again, the sky had cleared just enough for stars to break through, cold and distant. He didn't light a lamp, didn't look at the bed, just sat by the hearth, now cold, and listened to the crib creak in the wind. The next day, he brought what he promised: oats, firewood, rags, a comb. Willa opened the door just wide enough to take the offerings. The baby cried less now, still loud, still fierce, but not lost. Time passed without structure, just dust and silence between acts of necessity. Rhett stayed away from town. Willa stayed away from everyone else. But word, as it always did, crept like rot through the walls. "She's childless, infertile. That's unnatural. She wanted to adopt once. They turned her down, said she wasn't right." Rhett heard it all behind backs, over bags of grain, beneath polite tones that weren't meant to be kind. He didn't reply, just paid and left. Then one day, a different knock came at Willa's door. Mrs. Pratt stood sharp-eyed and thin-lipped, a wear-upon shawl around her bony shoulders, her voice dipped in vinegar. "Strange thing, raising a child that ain't yours," she said, peering down her nose. "She's not a horse, she's a person. Even horses need bloodlines." Willa didn't bother replying. The door shut before the insult could stain the air. That night, she carved a little bird out of cedar, added to buttons for eyes. She didn't tell anyone, just placed it beside the baby in the cradle and watched as one tiny hand reached out, clumsy and new. The child gurgled, maybe a smile, maybe a breath, but it didn't matter. Willa smiled back, quietly, as if something in her, long buried, was still capable of light. The next morning, Rhett returned again. This time, Willa opened the door before he could knock. "She cried less today." "That's so? She likes warmth." "I keep her by the stove." Rhett nodded. Slowly, "I don't mind keeping her a little longer," Willa added, voice level. "If that's what you want." He didn't answer, just looked at her like she was something sacred he didn't know how to hold. "You want to come in?" He stepped forward. Then again, the baby lay asleep in a wicker basket. The wooden bird curled beside her, one chubby finger rested on its wing. "She doesn't cry as much when she knows someone's coming back," Willa said. Rhett knelt beside the basket. His finger traced the curve of the baby's hand. "She's got her mama's mouth, not her fate." Willa replied, "Not if I can help it." Outside, the wind rose again, rustling the walls like breath held too long. And somewhere between the cradle and the fire, a name lingered, waiting for someone to be brave enough to speak it. A square of folded flannel, soft with age and stitched in delicate thread-dance work. One of the few things left untouched by blood or sorrow. "She made this," he'd murmured once. Said it was for just in case. They'd never gotten the chance to use it. Willa picked it up now, fingertips tracing the tiny loops and flowers along the edges. A tear welled in her eye, heavy with memory. But it didn't fall. "I'll keep it safe," she whispered. He only nodded, then turned and walked away. That night, Willa cradled the baby in the cloth Aunt had sewn, holding her close by the window, rocking her slow. The child's breath came soft and steady, her small chest rising and falling against Willa's. "You ain't mine," she said again, barely audible, "but I think I know what to call you now." The name rose in her throat like a prayer. Outside, at the edge of the woods, a silhouette sat motionless on horseback, watching. Willa froze. She adjusted her stance so the window framed only her body, the baby hidden in the crook of her arms. Her breath grew cold, steady. The figure didn't move. Neither did she dot when morning came. The air felt different. The wind had shifted, less sharp with winter, more tangled with unease. Rhett sensed it before he heard it, the rustling of whispers beneath porch railings, the scrape of suspicion in every sideways glance. Gossip wore no fists, but it landed with bruises all the same when he stepped into the mercantile to fetch feed. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Cabin's no place for a child, someone mumbled near the crates. "She ain't blood, ain't spirit. Hollow woman don't go fillin' her silence with someone else's sorrow." Rhett didn't reply. He gathered what he needed and paid with calm hands. But the hush that trailed him out weighed heavier than the sack over his shoulder. Back at Willa's cabin, the baby slept in a woven basket, one tiny fist curled around a strip of cloth. Willa sat by the hearth slicing sweetroot with careful, practiced grace. Her sleeves were rolled, her apron spotted with broth and ash, but her posture never bent. "She's sleepin' better," she said without glancing up. "That's something," Rhett said, setting the sack down softly. He moved toward the basket, watching the baby's breath rise and fall. A hint of a dimple ghosted across her cheek when she dreamed. "I brought coffee and feed. You don't have to keep bringing things," Willa said, wiping her hands clean. Her tone was soft. "But sure, I know you're grieving too, Rhett." She poured water into the kettle. The silence stretched, not tense but fragile, like to people who'd learned that too many words could split a good thing down the middle. He sat on the low stool by the fire. She smiled yet. Willa shook her head slowly. "Almost. But not yet. She'll get there." "She will," Willa murmured. "When she's safe." Rhett met her eyes. There was something there she hadn't meant to show. "You don't feel safe?" "She's not mine. That makes her a target. For the town. For anyone who thinks I'm not enough. She's warm, fed, cared for. People don't always measure worth by care," she said quietly. Turning back to the stove, Rhett watched her. How her body stayed angled between the baby and the door. How her breath hitched when boots passed too close to the window. The town still remembered who Willa was. Still hadn't forgiven her for what she wasn't. He thought back to the winters ago when Willa stepped up after a woman died on the trail. No one else had reached out first. But the church women turned their heads, their silence soaked in judgment. Said she didn't have the softness, that her arms had been empty too long. Willa hadn't fought, just left a quilt on the porch and never brought it up again. "You ever think of leaving?" he asked. "Every week," she replied, stirring the pot. "But grief follows, it finds its own." "She's not your grief, not yet." That night, rain rolled in hard from the hills. It beat the rooftops and rattled the shutters like old bones begging entrance. Rhett stayed late, mending the fence while the wind tore at it sideways. When he finally came in, soaked through, Willa handed him a dry shirt and a hot bowl. The baby was restless, jolted by thunder or maybe by whatever currents shifted in the air. Rhett lifted her into his arms and sat with her in the rocker, patting her back gently in the rhythm he used to calm his horses. "She likes you," Willa said. "I don't talk much. She trusts quiet." They sat that way for a long time. The baby nestled between them like a held breath. Rhett watched as Willa adjusted the child's blanket, her touch soft as wind through corn. "Still no name." She shook her head. "I almost say it sometimes. Then I stop." "Why?" "Because if I name her, someone might take her. Or I might start wanting more than I'm allowed." She rose and took down a small wooden box from a high shelf. Inside were handmade toys, carved animals, stars, moons. She pulled out a little crescent-shaped one and handed it to him. Made it last year. Didn't have anyone to give it to. He turned it over in his palm. She's yours now. Not till the town says so. Then to hell with the town. His voice came to sharp, and the baby stirred. He softened it again with his touch. Willa knelt beside the rocker. She has a strong grip. Holds my finger like she means it. She should. Willa looked up. I dreamt she called me mama. Just once. He didn't know how to answer that. Instead, he poured them both a cup from the kettle. The storm passed and left behind a world washed clean. Sunlight glittered on wet grass. Willa hung the baby's blanket to dry, her hands moving with the calm assurance of someone who'd learned the value of each thread. The baby cooed softly from the basket, touched by morning dot, but by midday. A knock echoed off the porch. Cal stood there, head in hand, face drawn. The council's meeting about the child, he said. Willa and Rhett both stilled. What kind of meeting? Rhett asked. The kind where I have to ask, do you intend to adopt her? She's got a father, Willa said. Technically, Cal replied, but the town says she needs someone more suitable. What's unsuitable? Rhett asked. It's not just her, it's her past. No husband, no children of her own. Lives alone at the edge of town. And that disqualifies her, Willa said. Voice cold. Cal didn't answer directly. I suggest you attend. Speak your piece. That night, Willa walked the cabin floor with Josie tucked tight to her chest. Rhett sat near the firelight, saying nothing. Why do they hate me so much? She whispered. They don't hate you. They don't understand you. I didn't choose to be alone. I know. She deserves someone without shame in her past. You're the one who heard her when she cried. Rhett said. That counts. Willa turned to him. Do you think that matters? I think it's the only thing that does. Josie stirred in her sleep, eyes fluttering open. There was a flicker there, something like trust, like knowing. Willa looked down. I almost called her Josie today, she whispered. Why didn't you? Because it's not mine to give. She already chose you. Willa looked at him. I won't beg to be seen as enough. You won't have to beg. You'll stand. And if they say no, I'll carry her myself. The fire popped behind them. Rain began again. Soft this time. Willa stood by the door. Josie curled into her collarbone. Don't let them take her. They won't. I need you to promise. He placed his hand over hers, over the baby's back. I promise. The next day, the meeting gathered in the back of the church. The windows were shuttered, but voices leaked through. Willa stood in the middle, child wrapped close, dress plain, face set. She didn't look to anyone. Just waited. Mrs. Pratt was first. No one doubts the girl meant well. But kindness isn't motherhood. She's not a stray pup. Another woman muttered. She deserves blood. She had blood, Willa said. It died. The preacher stirred. This isn't blame, Miss Thompson. It's the future. She's alive because I held her when no one else would. That doesn't make her yours. She's not a coat you pass on a hook. The room tightened. She sleeps now. She eats. Rhett said. That's not charity. That's love. You're her father. Raise her yourself. She needs someone who never turned away. Mrs. Pratt leaned forward. We remember Willa. No husband. No children. There are reasons. I lost a son, Willa said. Not because I failed him. Because the world did. That doesn't mean I can't care for another child. Whisper her name when the world says she doesn't deserve one. She has a name, Cal asked. I say it when no one's listening. Haven't claimed it out loud. Why? Because I knew you'd think I hadn't earned it. Say it now, Rhett urged. Willa looked down. Josephine, she whispered. Josie. The room quieted. Nothing more was said. She's not mine by blood, Willa said, but she's mine by breath. No one objected. No one volunteered to take her. One by one, the room emptied. That night, Willa laid Josie in her basket and sat near the fire. You think this peace will hold? She asked. It doesn't have to last forever, Rhett replied. Just long enough to build something better. You building with me? He didn't answer. Just placed his hand beside hers, close enough to be chosen. That night, a man stood, watching from the field. Willa saw him, didn't flinch. The man turned and disappeared. Then fever came. Josie burned, breath fast and wrong. Willa worked fast, cloths soaked in cold water. Rhett rushed in, eyes wide. She's too small, Willa said. I'll ride for the doctor, no. She needs someone here. So they worked, sweat and prayer, fear and cloth, until at last just before dawn the fever broke. She's still here, Rhett whispered. She's mine. Willa said, you were right to name her. I only whispered it. Say it like you mean it. She turned to him. I'm her mama now. But then came a knock. A man in a black duster, badge gleaming. Child's tied to a land dispute. He said, someone's claiming her, says. She was stolen. She wasn't, Willa said. Prove it. By sundown, when he left. Willa leaned into the door. Josie held tight. Rhett placed a hand on her shoulder. We ride at first light. Get it done. Bring her home. And if they say no, they don't get to say, you already did. Said what? That you're her mama now. And outside, as the sun rose, even the wind seemed to pause, waiting to see what Willa would do.